Franklin Delano Roosevelt came into office facing trouble. He was combating the Great Depression and what could be or needed to be done to help America get on its feet. He was elected in 1932, and when he was elected in 1932, he had already been stricken with polio, was already in a wheelchair. He didn't make that really well known, but in some ways, one of our weakest presidents physically. At the time, you have to remember, when he was elected, the USA was not a superpower in the world. We're used to just having American dominance now, but that was not the case right before World War II. But in 1940, FDR had already served 2 terms, and against the precedent of what presidents had done in the past, decided he was going to run for a 3rd term. In the midst of campaigning, France fell to Germany. And so many people in America were afraid that FDR would drag the United States into another world war. And Roosevelt promised and campaigned that he would keep America out of the war. He was friends with Churchill, and Churchill was desperately asking and begging to not just send supplies and not just fund the war in Europe, but to actively get involved. And at the same time, FDR did everything he could to try to negotiate with the USSR. What could be done? It was such a massive conflict that FDR faced, this massive problem in the world and at home, so much, and such a weak president trying to figure all this out. We're glad to find ourselves free from those big decisions every day. You know, those big decisions, you might have 1 or 2 a year. Some years you'll have a lot. Some years you won't have any. Some years you can just coast. And aren't you glad for those years? Looking back at 2023, maybe that was a year where you said, you know, I didn't have any real big major decisions. Or maybe you're here and you said that 2023 was a life changer. That was a big one. And I'm still trying to figure out if I made the right decisions or not. What will you do when those big decisions have to be made? How will you react when it comes to getting the heart of God for things that need to be done, that those decisions that can't wait any longer? What does the Bible have to say about this? We're going to look at the famous story of David and Goliath here. And I should tell you, and you would think that maybe you wouldn't need to know this, but I'm not going to take for granted that everybody knows that King David, who was in the Bible that we know about, King David that we're going to be learning about, is the very same David who fought Goliath in that famous battle. And you ask the average person on the street what they know about Bible stories, and they'll probably tell you Noah's Ark. They'll maybe tell you about Daniel in the lion's den, but probably they're going to mention David and Goliath. And that's one of the stories then in the life of King David before he became king. We saw already that he was anointed king last week in 1 Samuel chapter 16. And this week then, there is a testing after the anointing, but before his kingship. This is kind of a catalyst that brings David to national prominence. Now, if you ask a person on the street, what's the story of David and Goliath about? They're going to say something like, well, it's about facing your giants, right? It's about facing the big problems in life with courage. And that's the way it's portrayed, that it's a story. In fact, it's even just the way that we talk about things, facing your giants, or this is a Goliath of a problem. And it's the idea that little things are facing big things. And there's certainly that here in this story. But what this story is at its heart, and this isn't something that we talk about in Sunday school, but it really is a comparison between Saul and David. The writer of 1 Samuel is trying to make a case that David was a good king, the man after God's own heart that Saul should have been, but especially in this story, we see that he wasn't. And so as you read this, you see a comparison of a man who was put in a position to do the right thing and didn't, and a position of a young man, very young man, who was not put in a position, but put himself in a position because it had to be done. Verse 29 is where I am taking my jumping off point for the whole chapter. It splits the chapter right in half. David said, "What have I now done? Is there not a cause?" That's the question I want to ask you this morning. Is there not a cause? Is there a reason to make those decisions? Is there good reason to rely on the Lord Is there something that needs to be done? Is there not a cause for us? We're familiar enough with the story, but I want to bring out some principles. And first I want to say this, that cause is created by an enemy. The cause that we're asking about this morning is created by an enemy. Look at verse number 1. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle and were gathered together at Shokah, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shokoh and Azekah in Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together and pitched by the valley of Elah and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines named Goliath of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He had an helmet of brass upon his head. He was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron, and one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are you come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine, and ye servants to Saul? Choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me and kill me, then will we be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then shall ye be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. The Philistines kept making incursions into Israel, and we find out now that they're in Judah, which is where David was from. They were a constant threat and oppression. You remember that, and even Ben Bauckham brought this out on Wednesday night, that the Philistines had said, you can't make any swords, you can't make any weapons. So all this army that were here, they were using farming implements. That's all they could do to go into battle, was to bring their farming implements, maybe get a sharp stick or a rock or something like that. But the Philistines were oppressing the Israelites, and now they were making incursions. And they finally go to the valley of Elah, which is in the Shephelah. The Shephelah was a fertile area that was good farmland, and the Philistines and Israel fought constantly over this area. But now they're in the valley of Elah. And I did some study this week and found out that the Valley of Elah is kind of the last moment before you get into Israel, and there's a road running north and south. And if they get past the Valley of Elah, then they can go north and destroy whatever they want, even into Gibeah, the capital, or they can go south to Hebron. And those were the two major city points at that point. And so this is a breaking point. This is a point where this is like in World War II, we put everything into Normandy, and if Normandy had failed, then that would have been changing the whole scope of the war. This is a moment where they have to stop the Philistines here in the Valley of Elah, or the rest of the country will fall. The fate of Israel is at stake. They need to be stopped here. And Jesse knows this, and so he sends his 3 oldest to go and fight with Saul to secure that country. He says in verses 13 and 14 that he sent his 3 oldest into the battle to go with them. And in the midst of all of this comes a man named Goliath. He's called a champion, and the word champion just means someone who goes between. So this was something where this was pretty normal back in these days. Each side would send out their best fighter, and rather than having many people die, they would just boil it down to 2 people fighting on behalf of everybody else. And Goliath was someone who was used to this. In fact, Saul later calls him a man of war from his youth. He lived and breathed war and battle, and he knew how to fight. He was a known champion. He was the guy that nobody wanted to see. He was, if you ask Seth, the Patrick Mahomes of war, right? So there he is. And he comes out to make an offer, a one-on-one combat that will decide the fate of Israel. That will be the Philistines taking over the country, or Israel keeping what God gave them in inheritance. So there's the battle lines drawn up. And I want to tell you then to step back from the story and to say that you won't make a decision, you won't take action until you see the need. right? How many of you, well, I won't ask this, don't raise your hand. How many of you don't lock your doors at night? Maybe many of you don't. But how many of you would start locking your door if all of a sudden your neighbors started getting broken into? As soon as you see the need, you say, boy, we better start locking. We better start staying up. We better put some floodlights in, maybe get a Ring camera or something. We better have something on our property. You don't feel the need until all of a sudden, you don't take action until all of a sudden you feel the need. Or maybe you're kind of just wondering what this little lump is, and you don't think it's probably a big deal, but then you hear about a friend who had the same kind of lump, and they went to the doctor and found out that there was something serious. You don't take action until you see the need. FDR was trying to keep America out of the war, but as soon as Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, he could no longer stay out until there was a real enemy, until that enemy came to fruition, and all of a sudden you can see this is what we're dealing with, this is the enemy. You won't take action. And I wonder how many of us as Christians don't realize that we're in a war with a real enemy. I'm not talking about the border. I'm not talking about the Taliban. I'm not talking about Russia or China. Those are very real threats from an American perspective. But whether or not things were rosy and everybody was getting along, we would still have a real enemy, and that enemy is Satan. Goliath was 9 feet tall. He was 6 cubits. A cubit is what they say was the elbow to the fingertip. So about, 18 inches. It depends on how long your arm is, I guess. But possibly he was 9 feet tall. Huge. And we know that there were giants in this area. He was 9 foot tall. He was well fortified. He came with greaves on his legs. He had shin guards. He had a chainmail suit that was impenetrable. He had a target or a shield between his shoulders. So he had a breastplate. He had a helmet of brass. He had a spear that was so big it was compared to a weaver's beam. And on the end of that was a huge tipped spearhead. He also had a man walking in front of him. This enemy seems like nobody can overcome this enemy. He came as a personification of evil, and many commentators have commented that, the scales, it mentions the scales like a serpent, like he's a personification of the evil satanic serpent. But there's a real battle, and we need to understand this. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 6 that we wrestle not against flesh and blood. You think people are your problems? People are not your problems. We wrestle against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of this world, against the darkness that is in this world. And it may be that you have conflict with someone. Understand that the real conflict is against satanic forces. And satanic forces might be working through people, but our real battle all the time, whether you have conflict with somebody or not, the real battle is against the forces of evil, the satanic forces. And I'm not one that says, there's a demon behind everything, and if I stub my toe, that's a demon of toe stubbing. I know people get really kind of crazy about that. And I'm like, I don't have to get there just to know that I'm at war. You're at war. You're not going to do anything unless you understand that there is a very real threat against you. 1 Peter 5:8 says, be sober, be vigilant, because your enemy, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. And you as a Christian are not immune. If you are an immune Christian, it just means that you're not doing anything to get on Satan's radar. He doesn't care about you one bit because he knows you're not going to do anything anyway. But if you want to do anything for God, understand you have an enemy. And you are at war, and you won't take action. You won't do anything until you realize that there is a need. In 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 11, he says, we're not ignorant of Satan's devices. He is trying to get advantage of us. There is a constant threat, a constant war, a constant battle against Satan, against sin, against your flesh. And you need to understand that because we are in a war. If you don't understand that, you will lose. You'll be a shipwrecked Christian, and I don't want that. You need to wake up. There is a battle. There is a war. And nobody wants to go. Nobody wants to face it. And look at verse number 11. When Saul and all Israel heard those words of Goliath, the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Verse 24, and all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were sore afraid. All these men could do were run away and cower in fear. God wants us to know that we are in a battle, but it's not an unwinnable battle. But you have to understand that there is a battle. There's a war. You're at war with your flesh. You're at war with sin. You're at war with the world and all the influences. You're at war with satanic forces. You don't have to try to put your finger on what they are necessarily. Just know you are at war. Listen, our missionaries know that. We talked with Brother Hansen at our prayer breakfast in January. He said that there is a very concerted effort to threaten his life. That's going on today. We talked with the Weavers yesterday, and they talked about how the cartels are down a little bit, but they had 9 people in their church that were murdered. Can you imagine if we had 9 people in our church that had been murdered by the cartel? And he said they don't just shoot people in the head, they do indescribably horrible things to them. And yet there they are. They realize they're in a war. We don't have people murdered, so we don't think we're in a war. But it doesn't look around and you say, well, it would be horrible. We would realize we're in a war if it was 9 people that had been murdered in our church. But what about the people that were coming and became susceptible to sin, who started listening to the lies of Satan, and who dropped off? Listen, I'm not saying just because someone doesn't go to First Baptist Church anymore, they're demonically possessed. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that Satan is at work. And he wants to get you out of any kind of fellowship with God. He wants to get you out of any kind of help, any kind of defense. That's the thing that Satan will attack first. He's not going to come overtly and say, hey, give yourself over to gross sin. He's just going to get you away from your defenses first. We are at war. And if you don't think so, then he's already winning, because he's already convinced you that there's nothing wrong. Everything's fine. Just keep going with your life. You will not take action unless you understand that there is a cause. Is there not a cause? Is there a cause for concern? Is there a cause for us to wake up as Christians and to say, hey, there's a battle for my kids. Satan is after my children, my spouse. He's after my marriage, my relationship. He's after my friendships. He's after my opportunity. He's after my community. And I'm going to do something about it. You have to understand that first. Secondly, the cause needs to be addressed. The cause is there all the time, but it needs to be addressed. We have to do something about it. And so David goes to see the battle. In verse 12, now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. He had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. He was an old man. He was a well-known man, but he had 8 sons. And Jesse had already sent his 3 oldest. And now he had sent David to go and minister to Saul. Verse 15 says that David came back from those duties. It wasn't the time for sitting in the palace and listening to music. It was a time to go out to the battlefield. Then he says in verse number 17, Jesse said unto David his son, take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp to thy brethren. So he took provisions, maybe, let's say, a few weeks of provisions that would help supply the army. They didn't have just way they could buy things. They were really depending on people from the local area to send food to supply the army. So Jesse says, take this, carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge, or get something that shows that they're doing all right. Verse 19, now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David arose early in the morning and left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. So notice he's responsible. He's responsible for his sheep, and the Bible makes a point of saying he found someone to look after the sheep while he was gone. He was a good shepherd. He did what he was supposed to do. And he went and he followed exactly what his father told him to do. He made sure his things were kept with the keeper. We're just seeing over and over again that he was focused on the right thing to do. He made sure that everything was in order. And he went to see his brothers. And as he was out there, verse 23, as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words, and David heard them. We already read verse 24 that everyone ran away. Verse 25, the men of Israel said, have you seen this man that has come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house free in Israel. Now, there's an incentive here, right? And they hear Goliath come out and the people are saying, oh man, somebody should do something about this. And David, he's little. He's never done really anything but watch the sheep. I mean, he's so young that he's got 7 older brothers, and only the first 3 are sent off to battle. So there's a whole lot in between him, and he's just this little kid there. And he listens to Goliath, and he's looking around, and instead of everybody saying, that guy, I can't take that anymore, I'm going to go do something. He's waiting. David's waiting for somebody to do something, and they all run away. And David's saying, well, who's going to do it? Somebody's got to go in and take care of this. You can't just let him say that. He's defying the armies of the living God. Somebody's got to do something. Who's going to do something? And the answer comes back, well, I don't know who's going to do it, but it's not going to be you. Look at verse number 28. Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David. And he said, why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride and the naughtiness of thine heart. For thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. You're only here because it's exciting. Oh, a big battle. Things are so boring out there at the sheep that you got to come see some action. We know what you're doing. We know you're asking. Listen, it's not as easy as what you think. You think we can just go out there and fight this Philistine? You think it's easy just to go out there and fight? No. Don't pretend like you're the hero, like you know everything that there is to do in a battle. Okay? You think that somebody can just go out there and fight Goliath. Well, that's not the way this goes. I don't know who it's going to be, but it's not going to be you. And I wonder if David pointed his finger and said, well, it's not going to be you either. You have all kinds of people in your life that are going to say, well, you can't do that. Well, what are you doing? What are you doing? Somebody came to D.L. Moody once and said, I don't really like the way that you're doing this evangelism, the way that you're preaching and the way that you're doing the invitation and the way that you're bringing these things together. And D.L. Moody said, well, how are you doing it? And he said, well, I'm not. He said, well, I like the way I'm doing it more than the way I like the way you're not doing it. You'll find all kinds of people that'll say, well, it's not quite like that. There's probably a better way to do it, and maybe there is, but do something. Do something, right? So Eliab says, no, you can't do it. And then he goes and talks to the people. In verse 27, the people answered him after the same manner, so shall it be done to the man that killeth him. Everybody knows the incentive. Oh, I can be tax-free. I can be part of the king's family. I can be rich with great... nope, it's not worth it. David's not even thinking about that. I really honestly believe he's not thinking about all the riches. He's thinking, okay, all right, you're all talking about the incentive, so who's going to go? Oh man, did you hear what Saul is offering? Yeah, I did. Are you going to take him up on it? Oh, no. No, it's not enough for me. What's the point of going out there and potentially being the king's son-in-law if I'm going to end up dead? No, thank you. And David says, well, somebody's got to do it. Verse 30 says, he turned from him toward another and spake toward after the same manner, and the people answered him again after the former manner. He goes and says, who's going to do something? And everyone says, well, I don't know, but if they do, man, they'd get something for it. I don't know who's going to go and address this problem, this enemy that we have, but man, somebody should. Somebody's going to be rich. That's going to be pretty great for somebody. Who? David's asking who? Are you going to do it? Hey, you with the armor over there. Where'd you get that armor? You have a pretty good pitchfork there. You got a pretty sharp farming implement. Can you go and do something? No, not me. Well, what about you over there? I've seen you out there fighting. You're one of the captains. You're a captain of 1,000. Why don't you go out there? No, not me. I couldn't go. Well, who? Who, says David? Saul goes. And who is the one that should be out there? Saul. Why? Remember why Saul was chosen? Because he was head and shoulders above everybody else, right? He looked the part. If there's anybody that is equipped to go and fight Goliath, it's Saul. And what is Saul doing? Well, we talked about this on Wednesday night. Probably sitting under a tree somewhere, right? Sitting, waiting for someone to come along and play some music. Here's Saul not going out there. Instead, he tries to talk David out of it. Verse 33, thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he's a man of war from his youth. Oh, okay, so what do we need? Somebody who knows what they're doing? Somebody who has one of the 2 swords in all of Israel? Maybe that guy? He has armor later on because he tries to pawn it off on David. He's got everything he needs, but Saul's not going to go do it. And that's why this story is so important, because we see Saul with all the equipment that Goliath has and the same God that David has sitting back and saying, who's going to go? Nobody can do this. And David's saying, well, I don't know, but somebody should. And that somebody's going to be me. I'm going to go because somebody has to, because there's a great need. And there's a cause to be addressed. Is there not a cause? I've talked with everybody, and everybody says something ought to be done. Somebody got to go and take care of that Goliath. Somebody ought to go and make sure that that guy's mouth is shut. But who? David says, well, how about you? No, not me. Well, how about me? No, not you. Well, somebody has to. Somebody has to. David is determined to go in verse 32. Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine. If nobody else will, we'll ask the kid to do it. I'll go. Now, I really don't think he's saying it in a prideful way. I think he's saying, listen, if nobody else will, I will go. I believe that this is something I should do. You won't take action until you see that someone has to do it, right? Is it real easy to look around and complain and say, the world, there's a lot of problems in the world today. Oh, our culture has just changed so much. Why, when I was a child, this kind of thing would never be going on. It's real easy to complain and say something ought to be done. But what it takes is someone who says, is there not a cause? Is this cause not important enough for me to do something about it? When is it that moment where we say, okay, is enough, and I don't be done, but I'm going to be the one to do it. I don't know exactly the way forward. David, I don't know if he had a plan. I don't know if he thought through what he was going to do. He just said something needs to be done. Is there not a cause? We've been talking about it. All we do is talk about it. Let's go do something. You won't take action until you see that someone has to do it. The problem isn't going away. Look at verse number 16. The Philistine drew near morning and evening and presented himself 40 days. A whole month. They're just sitting there, eating up the food, just letting the Philistines become entrenched, going out there and having their little skirmishes. 40 days, Saul's just sitting with the Goliath coming out there and just making everybody afraid. And David says, enough. What are we doing? Now, sometimes you can wait, but isn't it true that often you wait too long? Sometimes it's good to have prudence and not rush into things, but honestly, isn't it just at some point something has to be done? You know, you're going to ignore that problem in your house. Oh, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to do it. Until all of a sudden it has to be dealt with. Can I just say that there are more things in your life that have to be dealt with today, right now, like not later. Not like when I feel like it, not when I have the resources, not when somebody comes into my life who's going to help me understand this. Right now, is there not a cause that right now something has to be done and that you have to be the one to address it? That there's a problem. What will it take for you to see that you need to act? Is there not a cause? Is holiness not a just cause? What's it going to take for you to start taking your walk with the Lord seriously? There are sins in your life that you're just allowing, and it's not a big deal. And at some point, it's going to become a big deal. What's it going to take for you to say, right now, I need to take care of this? And I know that you have a ton of people to blame. It's not my fault. It's my dad's fault. It's my mom's fault. It's the way I was raised up. It was my teacher. It was my spouse. It's my environment. It's this virus. It's any number of things. Yes, all that withstanding, what are you going to do about it? Here's Goliath. What can we do about it? We can't do anything about the fact that they're here, but we can do something about the fact that we want them gone. What is it going to take for you to do something? Is there not a cause? Is holiness not a just cause? Listen, is it worth pursuing holiness? Is it not worth making a sacrifice so that you can invest in somebody else? There are people in this room that there's a little tiny window of influence that you have. A little small time where you can influence them, where they're going to listen to you. I understand this as a father, that there are stages in life, and there are times when children are more susceptible to what you have to say and less. And I want to make sure that I have that window and that I'm honed in to when I can do what I can do, when I can do it. Because I'm going to lose that influence at some point. Same thing with the people in the church. The only constant in any kind of church is change. People come, people go, and praise God when they go for the right reasons, and I pray for them when they go for the wrong reasons, but I understand that for some people I have a little small window, and is there not a cause for me to do something when they're here under my influence? And for you, there are people in this church that could really benefit from you, but no, you have too much going on in your life. You have too much that you can't spare yourself. You can't sacrifice anything to go invest in somebody else. But I ask you, is there not a cause? When is it where the threshold is, okay, now I can do something? We have all these things where we just lament people in the church and, oh, the American church is getting so bad. And absolutely it is, but because Christians didn't do the right thing when they could have. Now it's too late. But what can we do? I don't know, but something. There's a need, there's a cause, we have to address it. Are there missions that are a worthwhile cause? Is the salvation of souls a worthwhile cause? Is there not a cause? Is there not a cause for you to go without so that we can send money to the Weavers so they can operate their feeding center and give the gospel to kids every day? Is there not a cause that we can make sacrifices so that we can help take tracts out into our community and give the gospel? Yes, I know that you might stand to lose something. You might stand to lose your reputation or face with somebody. But is there not a cause? Is it worth it? Somebody has to do something, and until you see the need, not just that there is a need and somebody should do something, I'll call my pastor and see if he can do something about that. Maybe I can, but maybe God has you in that place for such a time as this. Is there not a cause? You ought to be the one to pick up the phone. That's the call that God has for you. What's it going to take for you to say, I will take up this call? David is ready. He has walked with God, and he has seen God's hand. In verses 34 through 36, we've already talked about this when we talked about Psalm 23, but David says, there was a bear and a lion that came and took a sheep, and I grabbed that lion by the beard and killed him. And we say, whoa, well, he's not messing around. He's learned to rely on the Lord, and now he can answer the call because he knows there's a cause. Is there not a cause? Yes, there is. And I've already walked with God in the cause of saving that sheep. I relied on the Lord, and I'm going to do the same thing now. Verse 37, David said, moreover, the Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine. All Saul can say is, yeah, there's a cause. Go, and the Lord be with thee. God's not looking for someone who's perfect. He's not looking for someone who has everything they need. He doesn't looking for someone who's sinless, because I'd step down too. He's looking for somebody who says, yes, there's a cause. There's a need. And someone has to address the need. Not just that we can talk about it, but someone has to address the need. Finally, then, the cause must be answered. Not just addressed. Not just we should do something and I should do something. But then you actually have to go and do it. Then you actually have to go. All the praying in the throne room, Lord, just give Goliath a virus. Let the sun be too much for him and beat down on that brass helmet so he passes out from heat exhaustion. No, someone had to go do something. And so David did. Verse 40 says that he took a staff in his hand, chose him 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag, which he had even in a scrip, and his sling was in his hand. He drew near to the Philistine. He goes to the battlefield. And he says in verse number 45, thou comest to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a shield. Impressive. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. You are not dealing with just some kid. You've offended God, and I'm here to speak on his behalf. You have all the equipment to win, but I have the Lord, and you've offended him. Verse 46, this day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee. And he could just stop there. I'm going to kill you. But he says, and this is the part we don't tell in Sunday school, so kids, I will take thine head from thee, and I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. You have come to the wrong place and said the wrong thing. God is going to make sure that the animals and the birds get well fed today. Wow. Wow, huh? There's David, and he goes out there and he says, listen, I wouldn't come if it was just me, but you've offended God, and I'm here on his behalf. This angered Goliath. It says that he, in verse 48, arose. When it came to pass, when the Philistine arose and came and drew nigh to meet David, what does David do? He runs, not away. Notice he ran toward him. David is not going to play behind the rocks and trying to run away from Goliath and go under his legs and everything. He runs at Goliath. Listen, you won't take action, but you need to. Others are counting on you. There are other people who are waiting for you to say, I see the need, and I'm the one that's going to address it, and now I'm going to act. There are others who are just waiting for someone to come into their lives and make that difference. And you need to understand that you are the person to do that. There is a cause, and you need to take it up. There were times, I think, that Christians could sit back. There were times where things were not as desperate as they are now, but that time is over. And if you feel like this is still a time for me sitting back and enjoying the life that I have here in America, I'm here to tell you that you're sadly mistaken, that time has now passed, that we are in a war, that we're in a battle. There is a cause, and we need to take up that cause. World War II, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, mobilized people. People were ready to make sacrifices, and they were ready to do without sugar and tires and all the things that we needed. All of it went to the war effort. Women went to work, and men enlisted and volunteered to try to get into the army to go and fight this fight, because all of a sudden now we realize we have a real enemy. There is there needs to be addressed, and now I'm the one that has to go and do something about it. The problem isn't going away. We can't just sit by. And when we see, again, other people in Ukraine that say, we're going to go to battle. There's a story of two old ladies in Ukraine who made a homemade drone to go after the Russians. And it's just an amazing thing to think about people who are saying, what can I do? Well, you can't make drones. Oh yeah, you want to bet? Now, I don't know if they knitted them or what, but they put these drones together, and it's an amazing thing because they said something has to be done, and I don't know what I can do, but something, and I'm going to go do that. We have great missionaries. We have missionaries because someone had to go. It wasn't enough for Dan and Vicky to say, let's pray for Belize. And when they went and they established a church, and the cartel started threatening their church members, and they were run off the road, and Vicky was without oxygen for a time where she now can't talk, can't walk, can't do all the things that she was doing before. When we consider that and how they stayed, why did they stay? Man, it would have been so easy to come back to the United States and just live a nice life here and just be done. Lord, I gave you my voice and my legs and my time, and that's it. I'm done. They stayed. Why? Because someone had to. Because someone had to be there. Someone had to be in that place. Why is it that Mark Preem, when all of a sudden Russia invaded Ukraine, he could have come back. He could have said, well, I'll go pastor a church somewhere. I'll go find a nice little church in Wisconsin or Minnesota and get a nice little living and be done with that. And maybe I'll go back when the war's over. No, there needed to be somebody there. Somebody who was going to take the food to people and preach the gospel. And dozens of people have been saved because he stayed, because there has to be somebody who addresses the issue. Robert Moffat, a missionary to Africa, said this. He said, in the vast plain to the north, I have sometimes seen in the morning sun the smoke of 1,000 villages where no missionary has ever been. And a man named Robert Livingston said, I'm going to go because someone has to go. It can't just be that we can say, boy, that's tough. 1,000 villages. Oh, all those people that don't know Christ. Oh, something has to be done. David Livingston said, I'm going to be the one to do it. Hudson Taylor said, I'm going to be the one to do it. Adoniram Judson said, I'll go to Burma and I'll be the one to establish churches and to learn the language and to write a dictionary and translate the Bible because God uses people. And I'm not talking about you need to go there. I'm saying you have a mission field here. You have a cause here. Whatever the problem is here, you have to do it. But you have to see that there's a need. You have to be able to address it, and then you have to move. Like, I understand that you want a comfortable life. Can I encourage you? Things are going to get real comfortable in heaven. Can you just save your rest, your comfort for then? Then it's going to be wonderful, but now it's work. Jesus says, work while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. Listen, people say, Pastor, you're always very busy. And I know that. But here's my whole process and my mindset. There's coming a day where I'm not going to be able to be busy. I know that there's going to be limitations on me someday where I can't keep this frenetic schedule. And so what I can do today, I can do. And sometimes it feels like there's not a lot of fruit. And then I do a chaplain thing like I did on Thursday night. And they say, we see what you're doing. We appreciate you. And I said, I would rather not do death notifications, right? I would rather not go blow up somebody's day and tell them your loved one is gone. But someone has to do it. I would rather not go door to door and tell people you're in trouble with God because you've sinned against him, but God loves you and he made a way for you to be saved. And here's a gospel tract I would rather not do that. It's not very comfortable, but someone has to do it. Is there not a cause? Is there not a reason for us to do something like that? Are we not in a war? Are there not people going to hell? Is there not something that somebody can do? And maybe I'm not doing it right, but I'm doing something. And maybe you aren't doing it exactly the way that somebody else would do it. Maybe somebody slipped you a book of the right way to evangelize, and you're like, well, I'm not doing it that way, but you're doing it. That's great. Is there not a cause? Is there not a need? I mean, what is it going to take before we finally say, well, something ought to be done, and I ought to be the one to do it? Okay, I understand we're all busy. We're all busy. And you can say all you want, Pastor, well, you're busy doing the Lord's work because you're a pastor and you're paid to. Listen, there's a lot of stuff I do because it's just the right thing to do. I wish you could see what I would do is not a pastor. I don't want you to use that as an excuse. Excuse or not. You maybe can't spend 40 hours a week serving the Lord in that way, but you can do something. And week goes by and week goes by and another Sunday comes and you haven't done the thing that God's calling you to do. And there's a need and there's a cause. Somebody has to. And it can't be enough for us to just complain about the things that are not being done. David, he grabs his sling and he goes. And there's going to be obstacles. In verses 38 and 39, Saul tries to give him armor. David says, I haven't proved it. I haven't been in it. I don't know what this is like. I'm not going to rely on the protection. Now, does that mean that David never wears armor? Obviously, later on, he does. He gets into battle and he goes against the Philistines. But in this moment right now, he's like, I don't need the armor. I haven't proved it. I'm not ready for that. All I need right now is the Lord. Yes, you need help. Yes, you need equipment. Yes, you could always learn more about the Bible. You can learn soul-winning techniques. All of that is absolutely true. Question number one, are you doing anything about that to get that training? But number two, even if you don't have that training, can you say something? Can you give a tract? Can you be the person that's just going to be that Christian witness? Can you start living that holy life? Pastor, I need some kind of curriculum that's going to help me put my thoughts in order, to not be lustful in my thoughts or not be anxious in my thoughts. Absolutely, I can help you. But are you ready to take at least that step and say, there's something I can do to fight this battle? I know I'm talking a lot about giving the gospel, but I'm talking about whatever the need is, whatever the cause is, your walk with the Lord, your dependence on the Holy Spirit, that your parenting, your marriage, whatever it is, at some point is going to come to where you have to say, I need to do something. And I don't know what that point is. I'm asking the Holy Spirit to speak to you to say, today's the day, now, right now. Is there not a cause? Yes, there is, and it's right now. In verses 41 through 44, we see Goliath mock. He and this is interesting. In verse 41, the Philistine came on and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, that tells me that he was looking around. He's like, is this a trick? Or there's got to be somebody else. Like, I'm going to go after this kid, and somebody's going to come out and jump out from a boulder or something. Is this it? He disdained him, for he was but a youth and ruddy and of a fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air and to the beasts of the field. We'll be mocked, but don't be distracted. Yes, we're in election year. Yes, finances are not what they should be. The economy stinks. Yep, there's a lot of distractions. Yes, you have family problems, things that are grating on you. Yep, you've got a few appointments with your doctors coming up, and all those things are not unimportant, but they can be distractions. Goliath is out there telling him what's going to happen, and David just keeps focused. Because he's there for one job. He's there to rely on the Lord and to do something about the problem. He says in verse 47, All this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. David just out of hand dismisses, yes, you have a sword. Yes, you have a shield. Yep, you're armored. but today is God's battle. Wouldn't it be great to have that perspective? Yeah, things are going really badly in life, in this world, but I'm not looking at any of that. Yeah, there's a shield. Yeah, there's a sword, but I'm not looking at any of that. I'm just keeping my focus on the cause that God's called me to do. It will seem impossible. He has to get around this armor bearer, but he trusts and he runs toward Goliath. Now listen, when we look at this story, every one of us is tempted to say, yes, but that was the Old Testament where miracles were just everywhere. Can I give what the kids are calling a hot take? I don't think this is miraculous at all. I don't. In Judges chapter 20, verse 16, it said that there were 700 men in Bethlehem that could sling a stone at a hair's breadth and not miss. They could have stones going and hit a hair off and not miss. And YouTube sometime this week, sling and plywood. And just see what kind of damage a stone can do. Was it miraculous that David hit Goliath in the head? Nope. He'd been practicing on what else are you going to do when you're with sheep? You have nothing to do but just like, I'm going to put a target and I'm going to, because you need to know it when a lion or a bear comes, whatever. David knew what he was doing. It's not anything miraculous. But he had to go do it. Just because you know how to do it, it's one thing to hit a rock or a pumpkin or something, 50 yards away. It's another thing when this guy is coming at you. But David put all the focus off that and just did what he was supposed to do. I don't think it's a miraculous thing. I don't think what you have to do is anything miraculous. I'm not saying don't rely on the Lord. I'm not saying don't walk in the Spirit. I'm just saying if you're going to wait for some kind of woo to come down upon you so that you can do God's work, you'll be waiting and waiting and waiting, and you'll die and hear from the Lord, enter thou into heaven. Come on. Put all your things together. We'll put it in through the fire, and it'll be wood, hay, and stubble. And you'll live a comfortable life then, and you'll live a comfortable life in heaven. But the things that God could have done through you will all be lost. And I don't know about you, but I don't want that. I don't need to hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant. I'm well aware of all the things I'm not and could be, and God's working in me, but I want to do something. David he had to be the one that was on the battlefield throwing those rocks. He didn't need more ability. He just rested in the Lord. Verse 49, David put his hand in his bag and took thence a stone and slang it and smote the Philistine in his forehead, and the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. I'll point out, just because there are kids here, he fell on his face to the earth. Remember who was in front of him? The armor bearer. All of a sudden he's like, ah, and there's this giant falling down on him. That's the way I picture it. I don't know if that's really what happened. I would think he would fall backward, but he fell face forward. Now, David had promised that he was going to cut off Goliath's head, but he didn't have a sword. What a bold move, right? I'm going to cut off your head. You don't have a sword. I'll use yours. That's what he did. He went up and he grabbed, verse number 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone and smote the Philistine and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood upon the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of the sheath thereof and slew him and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw that their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines until thou come to the valley, the gates of Ekron. Ekron was one of the 5 Philistine cities. The Philistines are out of Israel. They're gone. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way to Sharim, even unto Gath, and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. Not only did they get rid of the Philistines, but they got to get all the armor and weapons and food and gold and everything the Philistines had. They left behind in their tents. They didn't pack up and leave. And Israel got a great victory. Not because someone faced their giants, but because someone said, is there not a cause? Who's going to go do it? If you won't, then I will. I'll trust in the Lord. And when Saul and Eliab and everybody else says, not me, David says, I will. I've got 3 things. I've got a stone, I've got a sling, and I've got the Lord. And I really only need that last one. David went. Is there not a cause? Listen, Christians, we have the same thing. We have the same God. Same God of the Old Testament. You don't need stones and slings. You just need the Lord. And you have him, and he has given you his Spirit. He's given you the ability, all things that pertain to life and godliness, 2 Peter says. All you need is him. But you have to understand, is there a cause? Is there not a cause? Yes, we're in a war. That cause needs to be addressed, and you have to be the one to do it.